Sir Claude said. It could have happened, but I'm sure it didn't, Lady Elizabeth said. Oh, Colby, doesn't your instinct tell you? Sir Claude says, yes. Tell us everything that is in your mind. I know this situation must be more of an agony to you than it can be even to us. Colby says, I only wish it was more acute agony. I don't know whether I've been suffering or not. During this conversation, I only feel numb. If there's agony, it's part of a total agony, which I cannot begin to feel yet. I'm simply indifferent. And all the time that you've been talking, I've only been thinking, does it matter whose son I am? You don't understand that when one has lived without parents as a child, there's a gap that can never be filled. Never. I like you both. I could even come to love you, but as friends, older friends, neither as a parent. I'm sorry, but that's the way I say it. Doesn't matter to me which of you should be my parent. Now, different situations, I guess, but I'm thinking of somebody who they'd be upset that they didn't care as much. It's like, but they did care, and they were upset that they weren't having and they cared about caring and that sort of thing. But Lady Elizabeth said, but a Mother Colby, isn't that a different? There should always be a bond between mother and son, no matter how long they've been lost to each other. Colby says, no, Lady Elizabeth, the position is the same. Our crueler, suppose I am your son. Then it's merely a fact. Better not know than to know the fact and know it means nothing. At the time I was born, you might have been my mother, but you chose not to be. I don't blame you for that. God forbid. But we must take the consequences. At the time when I was born, your being my mother, if you are my mother, was a living fact. Now, it is a dead fact, and out of dead facts, nothing living can spring. Now, it is too late. I never wanted a parent till now. I never thought about it. Now you have made me think, and I wish that I could have had a father and a mother, Lady Elizabeth says. Stop, Colby. Something has come to me. Claude, I don't want to take away from you the son you thought was yours, and I know from what you said that you would rather he was ours than only yours. Why should we make any further inquiries? Let us regard him as being our son. It won't be the same as what we had wanted, but in some ways better, and prevent us both from making unreasonable claims upon you, Colby. It's a good idea. Why should we not be happy? All of us, Artie, Claude. I feel as if this brought us closer together. Sir Claude, I should be contented with such an understanding, and indeed it's not so far from what I had intended. Could you accept us both in that way, Colby? Colby says, I can only say what I feel at the moment, and yet I believe I shall always feel the same. Sir Claude says, well, Colby says, it would be easier, I think, to accept you both in the place of parents, if neither of you could be. If it was pure fiction, one can live on a fiction, but not on such a mixture of fiction and fact. Already, it's been hard for me, who have never known the feelings of a son, to be disputed between two parents. But if we followed your suggestion, I know I should always be haunted by the miserable ghosts of the other parents. It's strange enough to have two parents, but I should have four? What about those others? I should have to live with those ghosts. One indignant at being cheated of his or her parenthood. The other indignant at the imputation of false parenthood. Both mocked at, Sir Claude says. Then what do you want, Colby? What do you want? Think of the future. When you marry, you will want parents for the sake of your children. Colby says, I don't feel tonight that I ever want to marry. You may be right. I can't take account of that. But now I want to know whose son I am. Sir Claude says, then the first thing is you must see Miss Guzzard. Lady Elizabeth says, oh, Claude, I'm terribly sorry for you. I believe that if I had known of your delusion, I would never have undeceived you. Sir Claude says, and as for me, I could have known what was going to happen. If I could have known, I would have gladly have surrendered Colby to you. But we must see Miss Guzzard. I'll arrange to get her here, Lady Elizabeth says, and I'll think you ought to get Egerson as well. Sir Claude rises and says, oh, of course, Egerson. He knows all about it. Let us say no more tonight. Now, Colby, can you find some consolation at the piano? Colby says, I don't think tonight the piano would help me. At the moment, I never want to touch it again. But there's another reason. I must remind you about your speech for the Potter's Company. Tomorrow night, I must get to work on it. Sir Claude says, tomorrow night, must I go to that dinner? Tomorrow night, Colby says, I was looking at your notes before you brought me into the conversation, and I found one note I couldn't understand. Reminiscent mood. I can't develop that, unless you can tell me. Reminiscent of what? Sir Claude says, reminiscent of what? Reminiscent of what? Tonight, I feel in a reminiscent mood. Oh yes, to say something of my early ambitions, to be a potter. Not that the members of the Potter's Company know anything at all about ceramics or any other art. No, I don't think I shall be in a reminiscent mood. Cross that out. It would only remind me of things that would surprise the Potter's Company if I told them what I was really remembering. Come, Elizabeth. Lady Elizabeth says, my poor Claude. And Sir Claude and Lady Elizabeth exit. And then there's a curtain, and we're on to Act 3. The business room is in Act 1. Several mornings later, Sir Claude is moving chairs about, and Lady Elizabeth enters and says, Claude, what are you doing? Sir Claude says, settling the places. It's important when you have a difficult meeting to decide on the seating arrangements beforehand. I don't think you and I should be near each other. Will you sit there, beside the desk? Lady Elizabeth says, on the other side, with the light behind me? But won't you be sitting at the desk yourself? Sir Claude says, no. That would look too formal. I thought it would be better to put Egerson there, behind the desk. You see, I want him to be a sort of chairman. Lady Elizabeth says, that's a good idea. Sir Claude says, on the other hand, we mustn't look like a couple of barristers, ready to cross-examine a witness. It's very awkward. We don't want to start by offending Miss Guzzard. That's why I thought that Egerson should put the first questions. He's very good at approaching a subject in a roundabout way. But where shall we place her? Lady Elizabeth says, over there with the light full on her. I want to be able to watch her expression. Sir Claude says, but not in this chair. She must have an armchair. Lady Elizabeth says, not such a low one. Leave that in the corner for Colby. He won't want to be conspicuous, poor boy. Sir Claude says, after all, it was he who insisted on this investigation. But perhaps you're right. Lady Elizabeth said, Claude, I've been thinking things over and over. All through the night, I hardly slept at all. I wish that Colby somehow might prove to be your son instead of mine. Really, I do. It would be so much fairer if he's mine. I'm sure he is. Then you never had a son. While if he was yours, he could still take the place of my son. And so, he could be our son. Oh dear, what do I want? I should like him to be mine. But for you to believe that he is yours, so I hope Miss Guzzard will say he is your son. And I needn't believe her. I don't believe in facts. You do. That's the difference between us, Sir Claude says. I'm not so sure of that. I've tried to believe in facts, and I've always acted as if I believed in them. I thought it was facts that my brother believed in, that my father believed in. I thought that what he cared for was power and wealth, and I came to see that what I had interpreted in this way was something else to him. An idea, an inspiration. What he wanted to transmit to me was that idea, that inspiration, which to him was life, to me was a burden. You can't communicate with an inspiration like that by force or will. He was a great financier, and I'm merely a successful one. I might have been truer to my father's inspiration if I had done what I wanted to do. Lady Elizabeth says, "You've never talked like this to me before. Why haven't you? I don't suppose I understand. And I know you don't think I understand anything. And perhaps I don't. But I wish you would talk sometimes to me as if I did understand. And perhaps I might come to understand better." "What did you want to do?" Sir Claude says. "To be a potter." Don't laugh. Lady Elizabeth says, "I'm not laughing. I was only thinking how strange to have lived with you all these years, and now you tell me you'd like to be a potter. You really mean to make jugs and jars, like those in your collection?" Sir Claude says, "That's what I mean." Lady Elizabeth said, "But I should have loved you to be a potter. Why haven't you ever told me?" Sir Claude says, "I didn't think that you'd be interested. More than that, I took it for granted that what you wanted was a husband of importance. I thought you would despise me if you knew what I'd really wanted to be," Lady Elizabeth said. "And I took it for granted that you were not interested in anything but financial affairs, and that you needed me chiefly as a hostess. It's a great mistake, I do believe, for married people to take anything for granted." Sir Claude says, "That was a very intelligent remark. Perhaps I've taken too much for granted about you, Elizabeth." "What did you want?" Lady Elizabeth says. "To inspire an artist." Don't laugh. Sir Claude says, "I'm not laughing." "So what you wanted was to inspire an artist," Lady Elizabeth says, "or to inspire a poet. I thought Toby was a poet because he wrote poems, and he was so beautiful. I know now that poets don't look like poets, and financiers, it seems, don't look like potters. Is that what I mean? I'm getting confused. I thought I was escaping from a world that I loathed. And Tony, and then too late, I discovered he belonged to the world I wanted to escape from. He was so commonplace. I wanted to forget him, and so I suppose I wanted to forget Colby. But Colby is an artist," Sir Claude says, "a musician. I am a disappointed craftsman, and Colby is a disappointed composer. I should have been a second-rate potter, and he would have been a second-rate organist. We have both chosen obedience to the facts." Lady Elizabeth says, "I believe that was what I was trying to do. It's very strange, Claude, but this is the first time I have talked to you without feeling very stupid. He always made me feel that I wasn't worth talking to," Sir Claude says. "And he always made me feel that your interests were much too deep for discussion with me. Health cures and modern art, so long as it was modern, and dervish dancing." Lady Elizabeth says, "Dervish dancing? Really, Claude, how absurd you are. Not that there isn't a lot to be learnt, I don't doubt, from the dervish rituals. But it doesn't matter what Mrs. Guzzard tells us. If it satisfies Colby, whatever happens, he shall be her son." Now, rather than just a dry reference, enacting mythology and its symbolism does something that even claiming to believe and putting meaning to it doesn't do. But of course, those three things together works best. There's a knock at the door, and Egerton enters. Sir Claude says, "Good morning, Egerton." Egerton says, "Good morning, Sir Claude and Lady Elizabeth." Sir Claude says, "I'm sorry, Egerton, to bring you up to London at such short notice." Egerton says, "Don't say that, Sir Claude. It's true I haven't much nowadays to bring me, but Miss E. wishes I'd come up oftener. Isn't that like the ladies? She used to complain at my being up in London 5 or 6 days a week, but now she says you're becoming such a countryman. You're losing touch with public affairs." The fact is, she misses the contact with London, though she doesn't admit it. She misses my news. When I came home in the evening, and the late editions of the papers that I picked up at the Liverpool Street. But I have so much to do in Joshua Park, apart from the garden, that I've not an idle moment. And really now I'm quite lost in London. Every time I come, I notice the traffic has got so much worse, Sir Claude says. "Yes, it's always getting worse," Lady Elizabeth says. "I hope Miss Egerton is well." Egerton says, "Pretty well. She's always low-spirited around this season. When we're getting near the anniversary," Sir Claude says, "the anniversary of your son's death," Egerton says, "of the day we got the news. We don't often speak of it, yet I know what's on her mind for days beforehand. But here I am talking about ourselves. And we've more important business, I imagine," Sir Claude says. "Egerton, I'm expecting Miss Guzzard." Egerton says, "Indeed, Miss Guzzard. Why are we expecting her? I have asked her to come." Lady Elizabeth is sure that she knows the name of Miss Guzzard. Lady Elizabeth says, "Miss Guzzard of Teddington." Egerton says, "Ah, indeed. I shouldn't have expected her name to be known to you." Sir Claude says, "She's been questioning Colby about himself, and he mentioned the name of his aunt, Miss Guzzard. Now she's convinced that Miss Guzzard of Teddington is the name of the person to whom her own child was entrusted." Egerton says, "What an amazing coincidence." Sir Claude says, "That's what it is, unless she is mistaken." Lady Elizabeth says, "Now, Claude." Sir Claude says, "And she came to the conclusion that her child must be Colby, so I told her the truth, but she cannot believe it." Lady Elizabeth says, "Claude, that's not quite right. Let me explain. I'm convinced that Sir Claude is mistaken or has been deceived, and that Colby is my son. I feel sure he is, but I don't want to know. I am perfectly content to leave things as they are, so that we may regard him as our son." Sir Claude says, "That is perfectly correct. It is Colby who is not satisfied with that solution. He insists upon the facts, and that is why I have asked Miss Guzzard here. She doesn't know that." Egerton says, "A natural line for Mr. Simpkins to take. If I may say so, of course, we might discover another Mrs. Guzzard." Lady Elizabeth says, "Two Mrs. Guzzards?" Egerton says, "I agree. It is a most uncommon name, but stranger things have happened." Lady Elizabeth says, "And both in Teddington?" Egerton says, "I agree, that would be most surprising. And at the same address?" Lady Elizabeth says, "I don't know the address. Miss Guzzard of Teddington, that's all I know, and that I could swear to." Egerton says, "It doesn't seem unlikely that there should be two Miss Guzzards in Teddington, but assuming for the moment only one Miss Guzzard, could there not have been two babies?" Lady Elizabeth says, "Two babies, Egerton?" Egerton says, "I was only suggesting that perhaps Miss Guzzard made a profession of looking after other people's children, in a manner of speaking. It's perfectly respectable." Well, what works best is passing on to family who claim it's their own. And, well, I mean, again, don't lie about parentage, because the family resemblance is going to be there, and people of all types aren't going to suspect. Sir Claude says, "Now you're suggesting that she ran a baby farm. That's most unlikely nowadays. Besides, I should have noticed it. I visited her house often. I never saw more than one baby." Egerton says, "She might have taken in another one as a temporary accommodation on suitable terms. But if she did that, we must inquire what became of the other one, Sir Claude says. But this baby was Colby. Lady Elizabeth says, of course it was Colby. Sir Claude says, but Egerton, you really can't ask me to believe that she took 2 babies and got them mixed. Lady Elizabeth says, that seems to be what happened, and now we must find out. What became of your child, Claude? Sir Claude says, what became of my child? The mother of my child was Miss Guzzard's sister. She wouldn't dispose of him. It's your child, Elizabeth, whom we must try to trace. Egerton says, if there was another child, then we must try to trace it, certainly, Sir Claude. Our first step must be to question Miss Guzzard. Sir Claude says, and that's what we're here for. She will be here shortly, and when she arrives, I will summon Colby. I wanted you here first to explain the situation, and I thought I would like you to conduct the proceedings. Will you sit at the desk? Egerton says, if you wish, Sir Claude. I do feel more at ease when I'm behind a desk. It's second nature, Sir Claude says, and put the case to her. Don't let her think that I have any doubts. You're putting the questions on behalf of my wife. Egerton says, I understand, Sir Claude. I understand completely. And there's a knock at the door. Sir Claude says, good Lord, she's here already? Well, come in. And Lucasta enters. Lucasta says, is this a meeting? I came to speak to Colby. I'm sorry. Sir Claude says, Colby will be here. But you're not involved in this meeting, Lucasta. Won't it do another time? Lucasta says, I came to apologize. To Colby, no matter. It'll do another time. Oh, I'm glad you're here, Eggy. You're such a support in any case. I've an announcement to make, and I might as well make it now, if you'll listen. Sir Claude says, of course I'll listen. But we haven't much time. It won't take much time. I'm going to marry B, Lucasta says. Sir Claude says, to marry B? But I thought that was all settled. Lucasta said, yes, of course, Claude. You got everything settled. That was just the trouble. You made it so obvious that this would be the ideal situation from your point of view, to get me off your hands. Oh, I know what a nuisance you've always found me, and I haven't made it easier. I didn't try to. And knowing that you wanted me to marry B made me determined that I wouldn't, just to spite you. I dare say that was why I took an interest in Colby, because you thought he was too good for me. Sir Claude said, and Colby? Lucasta says, why not? That's perfectly natural, but I'm grateful to Colby. But for Colby, I'd never come to appreciate B. Sir Claude says, but Colby, Lucasta, if I'd suspected this, I would have explained. Colby is your brother. Egerton says, half-brother, Miss Angel. Sir Claude says, yes, half-brother. Lucasta says, what do you mean? Sir Claude says, Colby is my son. Lady Elizabeth says, that is what Sir Claude believes. Claude, let me explain. Sir Claude says, no, I'll explain. There's been some misunderstanding. My wife believes that Colby is her son. That is the reason for this meeting today. We're waiting Miss Guzzard, Colby's aunt. Lucasta says, Colby's aunt? You make my brain reel. Sir Claude says, I ought to have made things clear to you at the time when he came here. But I didn't trust you to keep a secret. There were reasons for that, which no longer exist. But I ought to have told you. Lucasta says, well, I don't understand. What do I understand? Is Colby's behavior? If he knew it. He knew it, says Sir Claude. Lucasta says, why didn't he tell me? Perhaps he was about to. Anyways, I knew that there had been some mistake. You don't know at all what I'm talking about. But if he knew that he was your son, he must have been staggered when I said I was your daughter. I came to thank him for the shock he'd given me. He made me see what I really wanted. B makes me feel safe, and that's what I want. And somehow or other, I have something to give him, something that he needs. Colby doesn't need me. He doesn't need anyone. He's fascinating, but he's undependable. He has his own world, and he might vanish into it at any moment. Just at the moment when you needed him most. And he doesn't depend upon other people either. He needs me. He's been hurt by life, just as I have, and we can help each other. Oh, I know you think of him simply as a businessman, as you thought of me simply as a nuisance. We're suited to each other. You thought so too, Claude, but for the wrong reasons, and that put me off. So I'm grateful to Colby. Sir Claude says, I don't know what's happened, but nevertheless, I'm sure that you've made the right decision. Lucasta says, but the reasons why you think so are the wrong ones. Lady Elizabeth says, and I'm sure too, Lucasta, that you've made a wise decision. Lucasta says, and I know very well why you think so. You think we're suited because we're both common. B knows you think him common, and so he pretends to be very common because he knows you think so. You gave us our parts, and we've shown that we can play them. Lady Elizabeth says, I don't think you ought to say that, Lucasta. I've always been a person of liberal views. That's why I never got on with my family. Lucasta says, well, I'm not a person of liberal views. I'm very conventional, and I'm not ashamed of it. Sir Claude says, perhaps you were right. I'm not sure of anything. Perhaps, as you say, I've misunderstood B, and I never thought that I understood you. And certainly, I fail to understand Colby. Lady Elizabeth says, perhaps you are right, but I'm not sure of anything. Perhaps, as you say, I've misunderstood B, and I've never thought that I understood you. And I certainly fail to understand Colby. Lady Elizabeth says, but you and I, Claude, can understand each other, no matter how late, and perhaps that will help us. To understand other people, I hope so. Lucasta says, I regard you as a stepdaughter, and shall be happy to accept Mr. Kagan as a son-in-law. Thank you, I'm sure he'll appreciate that. But that reminds me, he's waiting downstairs. I don't suppose that you want us at your meeting, Egerton says. Allow me, may I make a suggestion? Though, first of all, I must take the occasion to wish Miss Angel every happiness. And I'm sure she will be happy, Miss Kagan is one of the most promising young men in the city. And he has a heart of gold. So have you, Miss Angel. We have this very important interview, but I'm sure that we want to greet the happy pair. It's all in the family. Why not let them wait downstairs and come back after Miss Buzzard has left? Sir Claude says, that's not a bad idea if Colby agrees. Lucasta says, I trust you, Eggy, and I want to make my peace with him. Sir Claude says, we'll get him now, and reaches for the telephone. There's a knock, and Colby enters and says, have I come too soon? I'm afraid I got impatient of waiting. Lucasta says, Colby, I've not come to interrupt your meeting. I've been told what it's about, but I did come to see you. I came to apologize for my behavior the other afternoon. Colby says, apologize? Sir Claude says, I've told her. Colby says, but why should you apologize? Lucasta says, oh, because I knew that I must have misunderstood your reaction. It wouldn't have been like you, the way I thought it was. You're much too detached to ever be shocked in the way I thought you were. I was ashamed of what I was telling you, and so I was expecting what I thought I got. But I couldn't believe it. It isn't like you to despise people. You don't care enough. Colby says, I don't care enough? Lucasta says, no, you're either above caring or else you're insensible. I don't mean to be insensitive, but you're really terribly cold, or else you've some fire to warm you that isn't the same kind of fire that warms other people. You're either an egotist or something so different from the rest of us that we can't judge you. That's you, Colby. Now, people talk about this borderline personality disorder thing, which ignores the differences between male and female, people of different cultures, even people within these cultures that, I don't think you're, I don't think your emotional reaction is what I think it should be. Now, I guess this puts it in the autism spectrum for some people, I guess, because, very strong emotions or contained emotions, or however you're going to phrase it. But again, people's emotional reactions is that, whatever their behavior could be a different thing, though. I'm trying to get these ants off me. Colby says, "That's me, is it? I simply don't know. Perhaps. You know me better than I know myself. But now that you've known what I am," Lucasta says, "who you are, in the sense I've been told that you're my brother, which makes it more difficult to know what you are. And maybe there's no one so hard to understand as one's brother." Colby says, "Our sister." Lucasta says, "What's so difficult is to recognize the limits of one's understanding. It may be that understanding as a brother and a sister will come in time, perhaps one day. We may understand each other and accept the fact that we're not necessary to each other in the way we might have been, but a different way that reveals itself in time, and perhaps, who knows, we might become more necessary to each other as a brother and sister than we could have been in any other form of relationship." Colby says, "I want you to be happy." Lucasta says, "I shall be happy if you will accept me as a sister, for the happiness that relationship may bring us in 20 or 30 or 40 years' time. I shall be happy. I'm going to marry B. I know you like B." Colby says, "I'm very fond of him, and I'm glad to think he'll be my brother-in-law. I shall need you, both of you, Lucasta." Lucasta says, "Well, mean something to you. But you don't need anybody." Eggerson says, "And now may I interrupt, Miss Angel? Why shouldn't you and Mr. Kagan wait downstairs and rejoin us when this interview is over? I'm sure Mr. Simpkins will concur in this proposal." Colby says, "Of course I'd like them. Can't B come up now?" Eggerson says, "Better wait till afterwards." Sir Claude says, "Quite right, Eggerson." Lucasta says, "Goodbye, Colby." Colby says, "Why do you say goodbye?" Lucasta says, "Goodbye to Colby just as Lucasta knew him, and goodbye to the Lucasta whom Colby knew. We've changed since then, and as you said, we're always changing. When I come back, we'll be brother and sister. Or so I hope. Yes, in any event, goodbye, Colby." Lucasta exits, and Colby says, "Goodbye then, Lucasta." Eggerson says, "And now, how soon are we expecting Mrs. Guzzard?" Sir Claude says, looking at his watch. "She ought to be here now. It's surprising. I hadn't been aware how the time was passing. What with Lucasta's unexpected visit, she ought to be here. It wouldn't be like her to be late for an appointment. She's always mentioned it. If I was late when I went to see her." Then Lucasta enters.